Hi there. My name's Erin. If you're new, welcome. We are studying the book of Matthew, and we're going to dive in today to chapter 2. If you see my security guard running through here, that's Rocky, and he's in charge of finding all birds and squirrels that are not allowed in the yard. So I hope he's not too distracting. Okay, let's get into it. So let's start. I hope you have your Bibles. Let's start Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So not much is known about these Magi. Traditionally, they call them wise men. We don't know where they came from. We don't know how many were in their group. It's likely, scholars would say, that these men were members of a highly educated religious class, likely from Parthia, which today is called Iran. They also believe they would have come from near the site of ancient Babylon. Since they were looking for the King of the Jews, naturally, they would come to the Jewish capital city first. So once they were in Jerusalem, they would have met with the king. And the king in Jerusalem at that time was King Herod the Great. The Magi would have arrived somewhere between when Jesus was 40 days old and 2 years old. So what's the importance of this story with the Magi? Well, Jesus is worthy of a royal honor from all people. From the Jews, of course, but also from the Gentiles. Who are the Gentiles? Gentiles are just people from every nation, and they're not Jewish, because Jesus came to save all people. Jews and Gentiles are included in God's plan to bring all people into a relationship with him. So how did the Magi know about the star? So let's read on in verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." When the Magi come to the king, King Herod, asking about the child king, Herod calls together his scribes and priests, who, quoting a verse from the Bible in the book of Micah, interpret it as a prophecy that the Jewish Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, which is south of Jerusalem. So as you can see, Bethlehem is 5-6 miles from Jerusalem. It's not very far, just a little to the south. So you can see the distance there, and then you can also see kind of how the land looked at that time between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And, just remember they're on foot in sandals. So, even though it's only a few miles, I'm sure that was a good journey. So these wise men could have been Jews who remained in Babylon after the exile. And that may be why they knew the Old Testament prophecies. Or they could have been Eastern astrologers who studied ancient manuscripts from around the world. And this is why they knew the Old Testament prophecies. They also may have had a special message from God. Maybe a dream or a vision, just some intuition that told them, that came directly from God, and they knew it was God, telling them about the birth of the Messiah, alerting them to that. Some say these men were each from a different land, representing the entire world, bowing before Jesus and fulfilling the prophecy that all the nations would come to him. That's pretty beautiful. So why is this story relevant to us, you might ask? Well, the Magi traveled hundreds of miles to see the King of the Jews. When they found him, they were full of joy, worship, and brought gifts for him. In today's day and age, people expect God to come looking for us, and we expect God to prove who he is to us and to explain himself and his choices and to give us gifts. But those who are wise, such as the Magi or the wise men, still seek and worship Jesus today, not for what they can get from him, but for who he is. God reveals himself to those who seek him and rewards them with faith, just as it's written in Hebrews. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So where was Jesus born? In Bethlehem. So this gives you a little view of Bethlehem. It's a small town, and like I said earlier, it's just 5 miles or so south of Jerusalem. It sits high on a ridge over 2,000 feet above sea level. So sitting up high like this, it can be seen very easily. Bethlehem also was the birthplace of King David. You can find this in the Gospel of Luke. Also read in Luke about why Joseph and Mary were in Bethlehem instead of Nazareth at Jesus' birth. So Bethlehem was in Judea, and Judea was also called Judah, and it had been the prophesied birthplace of the Messiah in Micah 5:2. So Jerusalem was the seat of the government, which was King Herod the Great. So who was King Herod the Great? Well, not a good guy. He was a ruthless and evil man. He murdered many, many, many people, including members of his own family, including his wife and even 3 sons of his own. He was not a Jew. His reign, however, was distinguished by renovating many monuments and buildings, including rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. Many of the Jews hated Herod because they didn't feel he was the rightful heir to their throne of David. Herod knew that if Jesus was truly the rightful heir, trouble would arise. Herod was a ruthless villain, and because of his many enemies, he thought people may overthrow him. Herod didn't want the Jewish people to unite around the King of the Jews. He didn't want that unity because the King of the Jews was a religious leader, someone there looking to save them. So if the Magi were Jews, and being from Parthia, which Parthia was the most powerful region aside from Rome, they would welcome a Jewish king because they could then swing the balance of power from away from Rome and to them. So as you can see here, Israel is very far from Rome. You can see the distance here in the photo. It would have been easy prey for an eastern nation such as Parthia to gain more control in that area. You can also see in this photo the vastness of the Roman Empire. When you compare it to Judea, it pales in comparison. So, who are the chief priests and teachers of the law that Herod turned to for advice? The chief priests were scholars of the Old Testament. Therefore, they were aware of the verse in the Old Testament in Micah 5:2, which reads, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times." So throughout the book, Matthew highlights their knowledge and their unbelief. Ironically, these same religious leaders, knowing the prophecy of Micah, as well as many other prophecies in the Old Testament pointing to Jesus' arrival, they became his greatest enemy. When the Messiah, whom they had been waiting for, finally came, they didn't recognize him. So then we read on how Herod lied to the Magi. So in verse 7, then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." He did not. That's where the lie is. He did not want to worship Jesus. Herod wanted to know where Jesus was so he could kill him. Okay, hello, surprise. It's evening. So any moms out there that can relate that all of a sudden everything changes? Yeah, so gotta pick the kids up from school, gotta go for haircuts, gotta make dinner, everybody's gotta eat, then you gotta clean up, and now here I am again. So let's get back to it. We are at when the Magi meet Jesus, which is chapter 2, verse 9. So let's read in verse 9. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with a gift of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So when the Magi finally meet Jesus, he was likely 1 or even 2 years old. But by this time, get my notes back over here. But by this time, Mary and Joseph were living in a house, which obviously they had intended to stay in Bethlehem for a while. The Magi gave them expensive gifts, gold, frankincense, myrrh. These were to show a worthy acknowledgement of the future king. Gold was a gift for royalty. Frankincense, I just realized my microphone was off to the side. I'm sorry. I hope this turns out okay. Frankincense was a gift for deity, and myrrh was a spice used to anoint a body for burial. These gifts, they may have provided financial means for the family, which would allow them to travel to Egypt and back, possibly. The Magi worshipped Jesus for who he was. This is the essence of true worship. honoring God for who he is, and a willingness to give him what is valuable to you. Worship God because he is the Almighty. He is just and perfect, the creator of the universe, and worthy of the best you have to give. The Magi were warned by God not to return to Jerusalem to King Herod as they had intended. This is similar to how things go in our lives. When you find Jesus, you may find that your life takes a swift turn, that a path you were on is the exact reason you found Jesus when you did. Honor his voice, heed his warnings, and seek him always so he can guide your steps. So the Magi, they returned home via a different route, avoiding Herod and Jerusalem. So next we move on to verse 13, where Joseph receives a second dream. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream.
Tomorrow,
Get up.
There will be snow flurries with a high of 32 degrees Fahrenheit and a low of 15 degrees.
Don't mind the dog, he's just eating his dinner. Okay, verse 13. Joseph receives his second dream. So in verse 13, it reads, When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. Joseph's first dream revealed that Mary's son would be the Messiah. The second dream told him how to protect the child's life. Joseph obviously was not Jesus' biological father. He was Jesus' adopted father. He was in charge of Jesus' safety and well-being. Joseph remained at full attention to receive God's guidance. God's protection requires our obedience. We must follow what God asks us to do and not allow our judgment to interfere. The hardest thing to learn about trusting God is that sometimes in our lives we go through tough times. God may allow things that we don't like to happen to us. This is always so we can learn valuable lessons and fulfill his purpose. Jesus essentially began his life as a refugee in a foreign country amongst strangers. It would have been easier if God just removed Herod before Jesus' birth. This would have eliminated all the tragedy that happened surrounding Jesus. But God had other plans. Remember that if God asks you to go through it, he'll carry you through, all the way through to the other side of it. And he'll never leave you the entire time. You just have to rely on him, speak to him the whole time, be honest with him, be open with him. Let him know when you're hurting and you're scared and you're frustrated and you're angry. And, there's no emotion that you could ever show that is going to make him turn his back on you. Remember, Jesus came here to be human, to experience it. So he gets it. So let's go on to verse 14. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, Out of Egypt I called my son. That prophecy is from Hosea 11:1. And I just, as I'm reading through that, you just have to think, Joseph didn't say, let's pack our bags, let's take a shower, let's fill the car with gas, let's, get some groceries. He didn't. He went in the middle of the night, grabbed his wife and his son, and got on the road. When God gives you a warning, you listen and don't dilly-dally. Go now. Time to go. So, interestingly, I found that through this study that maybe you have seen this correlation before. It was new to me, but that Jesus's life mirrors the major movements of the history of the Israelites. And he kept the law of Moses perfectly. So I'm going to put the scriptures on the screen for easy reference if you want to look these up. But I'm just gonna broadly reference them. So Joseph took his family to Egypt for refuge. The Hebrews went to Egypt to escape famine. Herod killed the babies of Bethlehem. Pharaoh killed the Hebrew boys. Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. The Hebrews were saved from the Egyptians through the Red Sea. Jesus spent 40 days fasting in the wilderness. The Israelites wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. All of these events show how God worked to save his people. So Joseph, Mary, and Jesus left Bethlehem. After Joseph's dream from God, they left in the middle of the night and headed to Egypt. So let's read on in verse 16. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. Jeremiah 31:15. That's where that prophecy was from. Herod, the king of the Jews, killed all the young boys under the age of 2 in Bethlehem. What a horrible, horrible time that must have been. This was an obsessive attempt to kill Jesus, the newborn king, and shows just how ruthless Herod was. But he didn't harm Jesus. He didn't get to Jesus. He didn't kill Jesus because God protected them. Herod thought the Magi had outwitted him, but it wasn't the Magi. It was God. Herod was afraid Jesus would take his throne. But Jesus didn't want Herod's throne. He wanted to be king of Herod's life and of every life on earth. Some people don't want to commit to Jesus as their king because they don't want to give up the things that they put on a throne in their lives. But if people could only see the love and protection and peace that comes from trusting in God to guide your path, they would run to him. Because no one can thwart God's plans. And why was Rachel mentioned in verse 18? It mentions the prophecy in Jeremiah 31:15. See, Rachel had been the favored wife of Jacob, one of the great men of God in the Old Testament. Therefore, she was considered the mother of a nation. From Jacob's 12 sons had come the 12 tribes of Israel. Rachel was buried near Bethlehem. You can read about that in Genesis 35:19. Next, we see that Herod dies. In verse 19, we can read on. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So Herod the Great dies in 4 BC of an incurable disease. When he died, he divided his kingdom between his 3 sons. He knew that Rome would never give his successors as much power as they had given him, so he divided it 3 ways. Archelaus received Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. Herod Antipas received Galilee and Perea. Herod Philip II received Trachonitis. Archelaus, who ruled over Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, was a violent man, just like his father. And he began his reign by slaughtering 3,000 influential people. 9 years later, he was banished. Therefore, God did not want Jacob's family to go into the region of this evil ruler. So we learn about this as we read verse 21. So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. So looking at this photo, you can see where Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, where they're at, and where Nazareth is, and where the district of Galilee is. You can see that Joseph didn't take them far outside that area, but just outside that area into Nazareth. Nazareth sat in the hilly area of southern Galilee, near the crossroads of great caravan trade routes. The town was very small and insignificant, definitely not what you're seeing in these photos. This is, of course, modern-day Nazareth. Because of the trade routes, the people of Nazareth were in constant contact with people all around the world, which for most, that was very rare. People didn't communicate around the world like we do today, so world news reached them quickly in Nazareth. Because of this, the people of Nazareth had strong independence, something that many of the other Jews despised. This may have been why Nathanael commented in John chapter 1, "Nazareth, can anything good come from there?" Well, we'll soon find out in our next study, which is chapter 3. We're going to jump ahead 30 years and meet the adult Jesus as John the Baptist ushers him in by paving the way for the Messiah. I hope you're enjoying the study. I know I am. Please leave me a comment and let me know. Let me know any prayer requests you have. God bless you. See you next time.